This is an interview in relation to the Little Brown Jug Oral History Project being done by the Delaware County Historical Society. And we're meeting with Mitch Ross and with Cheryl Ross. And today is March the 3rd, 2020. So we're going to start with how old you were and what year it was when you first visited the jug and saw it. Do you remember?
I actually don't remember my first jug. I remember being very little and being at the track, with family, because we had, I had an uncle who was like the stall manager for a great uncle, who was a stall manager for the horses. And then my aunt, I believe at the same time, was the outrider, or my cousin. My cousin was the outrider for the races for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so being up, I just remember being up there. I remember it being, but I can't tell you, my first memory of my very first jug that I think, and this goes back to what I was saying about, I don't remember if I remembered or just hear the stories, was probably about 1965, the year that they did the whole mud. So that they raced in the afternoon after they peeled the mud back, and by the end of the day they were putting water on the track, and so I feel like I remember being there then, but okay. I know that vintage is about the time that I would have been there. Yeah.
And you would have been about how old in 1965?
7 or 8. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of memories about the jug before I ever got there, because I didn't really get to actually be at the jug until 1971. And by that time, my grandfather had won 2 jugs, and my father had won a jug, but I wasn't there for any of those. I'll have stories about that. So my father had passed away, and my mother moved we lived in Cincinnati, and she came back with 5 children, and we moved back to Delaware so my grandfather and grandmother could help her raise us, or help with all the kids. But so I got to my first race, and it was in 71, and I had no idea of what I was going to see at this first race. And my grandfather, being Curly Smart, he parked a truck and on the fairgrounds, because they had a box seat, but it was only for my aunt, my grandmother, and the older generation to sit in the box. So he parked a truck there, and my cousins and I sat there, and we were in a crowd of people you couldn't even believe. It was packed. I mean, just that jug day was just, so many people there. And the horse Albatross was running that day, and he was the favorite by far. And he lost the race to Nansemond. It was Hervé Filion that won that day. But the crowd was just, it was kind of exhilarating. Just so many people and just a lot of fun. Parties going on. It was just a big festival. And I really realized how important my grandfather was at that time. He was the track superintendent then. And it was a shock to see that many people, and it was a great day.
Okay. It's a very big event, and for a little county fair, it's really pretty impressive.
Yes.
Okay. Since those, have you attended most years, some years, all the years? How often have you attended?
Probably most years we have, if we've been in town, or I moved away for a little bit. But most years, if we're in town, we'll be at the races. We still have the box at my grandfather, the original box. We get that each year. So we still, family and all, we still go to the races.
I think the only times I would have missed would be because I worked for the fire department, and until I had enough seniority that I could take the day off, You know, if it fell on my duty day, I would probably work, but I usually was able to finagle a way to get away somehow. So
Okay.
we brought our daughter home on Jug Day.
Yes, when my daughter was born in '84 on Jug Day, he dropped Megan and I off at the house and headed to the races.
Well,
He
not
said,
exactly.
Well, that's exactly.
Yeah. We actually ended up having an emergency run near our home, and I rode with the squad as a helper because of the volunteer fire department at the time, and then they sent somebody over to pick me up at Grady, and I said, hey, the race is about to run, let's
Yeah.
swing by there. So I got to see the race. Because I don't think I'd missed very many up until that point. So.
I see. Okay. So you have a lot of races, a lot of experiences. If you were picking out things that are the most memorable, exciting, whatever adjective you want to use, races, what comes to mind?
Ooh. Well, I mean, there's a lot of memorable moments, obviously, when you know, like when she said Nancy won, and you know, that wasn't supposed to happen. You kind of remember that. Obviously, the year, of course, I mean, like I said, even that probably didn't mean as much to me then, the year that they were able to set a world's record on the track.
Miracle at Delaware when he
and
he had the
I
track
did
ready.
not know Cheryl did, you know, when her dad won. We hadn't hooked up yet or anything, you know, at that point. So, but probably to me would probably be the year when we determined that was '95. Her brother, who was training at that time, also had a horse in the race. And I was helping him in the paddock and stuff like that at the time. I'd go down to Scioto and help him once in a while, and then I was helping him for a couple years at the races. So that was to me, I mean, a pretty exciting day,
Sure.
you know. And he actually didn't get to the final, but you know, it was a big day, and he had and we were all shocked that he was staying with us at the house, and he told us that morning that he had gotten John Campbell to drive, and we're like, you know, how'd you do that? Because we knew, you know, he usually drove the you know, favorite horses and all that, and he had one of the heats that he didn't have a drive in, so Tim was able to get him, and he drove, and obviously we determined that if we have to come back for the final, he probably won't be driving our horse because he won that year. You know, his horse won that year, but we didn't come back to the final. But it was still, and he had other horses that day too that did. He won a Breeders' Championship that day, and stuff. So we were in the winners. So that was kind of fun. But my memory, I mean, just it seemed like my dad worked for the Columbus Dispatch as a photographer at the time, and between that and being on the fire department that had trucks behind the track, and having press pass with my dad, pretty much being able to get places most other people can't get into the infield and things like that were always pretty exciting to me.
Yeah.
You know, to see. I think I was on the infield the day Nancy run, and just remembering because back there you have all the people that really know the horses talking and hearing them, you know, oh, you know, we're going to set world records, and Albatross, we got to make sure that everything's fine for him and all that, and then he gets beat. You know, it was just fun. You know, those are the things that you know, just little things that aren't really necessarily. I'm not one of those guys that could tell you, well, in 97, this horse won, and this was his time or anything like that.
There are some of those.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You know, and you know, but just being able to be there and be kind of almost behind the scenes was kind of fun for me. I don't know.
And I don't have any particular, other than, you know, the races, I could say the grandfather was, you know, just hearing the stories from my mother and my grandmother and all that, those races have some.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you're mentioning that we've heard from other people is the intimate atmosphere of the Jug, that you can be that close to the
Yeah.
horses and the drivers and so on. And I guess in your cases, you got really close
Yeah.
to people who were training horses and so on, like when you have them over your house. To what extent would you say the jug has changed over the years, and in what sort of respects would you say it's changed?
I've noticed, I mean, the grandstand isn't as full as it used to be, it seems like, but I don't know whether maybe a lot of the people are, different places around the track. The crowds are a little smaller. Seems like a lot of Delaware people that I know still really enjoy going up and, having parties and watching the races and maybe not as many as used to. I don't know what.
I mean, I'm just probably anecdotal. I don't know that the people, as many people that come to the races now come specifically for the races, for the horses. They come because it's it's an event. It's, but it seems like it used to be that more people came to the races and were not like me, could tell you what horse had won, the year before, or raced earlier in the week at such and such a track.
Right, a lot of
whatever.
drivers were kind of superstars, they would come like, that they knew all the drivers and they wanted to see, how they did in the races. And gambling, you can gamble anywhere now, they enjoyed that, going to the pari-mutuels and betting on the races. And I think they still do somewhat, but they can do that in a lot of other places as well.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that it's even though it's still located at the Delaware County Fairgrounds, it's still the local, at the Delaware Fair. It's not, I don't know, it's not quite the same. I don't know exactly. It's just a different feel if you've been there for, since the 60s or whatever. It has a whole different feel to it. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But
Can you say a little bit about what you think is a different feel?
well, I don't know. It's
I know
just
maybe horse racing isn't as popular as it once was.
right. Yeah.
And
For sure.
I mean, obviously the crowds are smaller. I mean, not as packed, I should say. Maybe the crowds are the same numbers, but they now have more seating around. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, they used to have to shoo people off the roofs of the barns, and things like that, because they'd climb up on the horse barns back there to be able to see the races. Where now, if you're back there, you can see the race. If not, it's not. I don't know. Seeing the actual race isn't as important to some people as it is. And I mean, even Delaware has changed to the fact that it's, downtown Delaware. If you ever came through downtown Delaware on that Thursday afternoon, it was a ghost town. I don't know that it's like that as much anymore. I'm usually not down there, so I can't guarantee you that. But you just don't get that feeling. And I remember used to tell people that, I don't know, trying to schedule something, and I'm like, well, that's Delaware County Fair Week. They're like, well, who cares? I'm like, well, apparently you don't understand.
yeah, everything closes on it.
So, especially Jug Day.
Yeah. Oh. And plus not being connected with, when my grandfather was here, it was so nice because you knew a little bit what was going on the racetrack, and we knew a lot of the people that were, in the grandstand, and different drivers that came into town to race, and they had parties, every night. They would, when people were in town, and it changed. And since we don't have that direct connection anymore, I can see that just takes. I still am excited of the people that are racing, and I'm sure that that's wonderful for them, and it's fun to watch, but you miss it a little bit.
Well, now's a good time for me to ask
Connection.
about your recollections of your grandfather and how you see the relationship of him to the race to him.
Mm-hmm. I think, well, when I was thinking about it, I thought about, knowing the story of that first race, that he really wasn't even supposed to be driving in that
Didn't know
first
that.
brown jug. It was a driver by the name of Sepp Palin, and he was driving for Castleton, I believe it was, and he had been injured in a race a week before, and the owner thought he really wasn't up to driving that day, and he didn't either. So they went and got my grandfather and said, I think he was going to be racing that day, but they said, you got to come over because you've got to drive this horse for him, Ensign Hanover. And he's like, okay. So he got over to the fairgrounds and won with Ensign Hanover the first jug. And it was such a thrill for Delaware County to have that race, and Grandpa Curly Smart to be the winner. So they were just, it was such a great time. The governor, was it Lausche? Who was the governor? I'm trying to, but anyhow, but the governor was there, and just everyone in town. That was such a thrill.
But he didn't know
And
the horse.
That wasn't his horse. No,
No.
he just was the driver up. So he won the race. He was able to, be the driver of the horse that won the race. So, yeah, so that was just great. My mother had just graduated from high school in Delaware, and she was out at Stevens College, and she got a telegram that said, your father won the first Little Brown Jug in 1946, She was so upset. She loved harness racing, and she found out that he had won that first jug, and she was out of town. So that was a real thrill for, just for the home, for Delaware to get that
Sure.
prestige.
Sure.
So it was a thrill. And my grandfather said he never really got any good horses until he won that race, and then people were willing to give him, better horses, and and it kind of, he was doing well in his career, but even better
Yeah.
after that win.
Do you have any idea how long he had been a driver before the jug?
Oh, a long time. Let's see. He was born in 1904, and so when he was driving the jug for that first jug in 46. So
Yeah.
it was give me the okay, so
42 years old.
41.
Yeah,
Yeah.
40.
So, but he'd been in harness horse business for a long time.
Okay.
He had started out in Ostrander, a little track out there. He had an uncle that raced horses, and he taught him everything he knew, and so he'd been in the business for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just keep going with that. So when he was training horses, when he was involved with that, is that something that you were able to tag along with?
I know my mother went to a lot of the fairs. They, race all over, Ohio, and they'd go and do a lot of fairs and racing. Before he got into the Grand Circuit, and would race, in New York and all over.
Yeah.
And but they did quite a bit of traveling
Okay.
and at different fairs. I remember one story he told about one fair where he was racing and won 3 races that day, and they paid when he went to get the pay, they gave him 300 $1 bills, and he said, I put it in the glove box, and I didn't give anyone a ride home that night. He said, but yeah, so he'd been in the business. That was his
Okay.
for a long time.
How would you describe your grandfather's personality?
Oh, he was a real character. He was about 5'2", maybe at the most. I think he was about 5 foot when he passed away. But he was a character. He was funny, so laid back. He knew everyone in Delaware. They knew him. He called everybody Bub. Hey, Bub. He never could remember a name. My grandmother never learned how to drive, so he had to take her everywhere and take her to the grocery store. And they said, he'd be holding court in the produce department, because everyone wanted to talk to him. And he was always, glad to do that. He just enjoyed people so much, and just was very fun man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wealth of knowledge. I mean, when you were mentioning
A wealth of knowledge, yes.
when you were mentioning
Mhm.
about reconditioning an entire track. If I understand correctly, he was the track superintendent.
Superintendent, right, for a long time, and you know, and there were a lot of records made on that half-mile track, and he was real famous for it. Other tracks would have him come down, like to Pompano and different places
And
to
I
help
guess that's
out with the
something I
track
didn't know.
conditioning, yes.
Okay, so he was the track superintendent here, but I'm assuming, right, that he was away from Delaware.
Not, well,
Some
I think
times.
later on he did some things, went down to Florida maybe in a cup in the winter,
Okay.
and would have helped down there at that time in Pompano, as I understand.
Okay.
But
All right.
he had his horses out at the fairgrounds here in Delaware.
Okay.
And he raced down at Soda Downs as well. Was, you know, always did well there, and he was known. You know, I remember we'd go to the Highlight restaurant, which was, you know, and we'd go there, and there could be a crowd there, and they'd say, "Mr. Smart, we've got a table for you." We'd go around you know, he just had fame even out of Delaware, you know, even
Yes.
because people in Columbus loved to watch him drive and wanted him to succeed. He was just such a good guy.
Okay. Well, we need to talk also about your dad, and who was a successful driver as well.
Mm-hmm. And my mother met him at the racetrack. He you know, and she just loved harness horse racing so much. But they fell in love, got married, and he got a job with Samuel Huttenbauer, who was a meat packer in Cincinnati. So they moved down there, and he worked for Sam Huttenbauer for his whole career, and raced horses for him. And they had a farm, Francebet Farm down there. And he drove all over to different racetracks, but that was kind of the thrill for my mother to have him come to Delaware and win the Little Brown Jug. She was so thrilled. And that race they raced on Friday because it's rained, and so I read somewhere, there was something in Sports Illustrated that said that, you know, the whole town was at the racetrack that day with, you know, and having, you know, it was a party and all on that Thursday. And when they canceled, everyone already had their picnics and their, you know, everything there. They said it was probably the biggest cocktail party in Ohio that, you know, that afternoon, but the race didn't go on till the next day, that Friday.
Yeah.
And he wasn't favored to win. There were like 3 horses from New York that you know, that all the sports writers said that would probably beat Best of All, that he wasn't the best one, and that, you know, my father, he quoted, you know, that we showed those big city riders who the best horse was, you know, so yeah.
And he was a
it was
trainer
thrill.
and a driver.
Trainer and driver,
And
yes.
I don't know whether he was sort of the last of the breed, or because that's not as common these days.
I know, and really, he was getting before he passed away in he won the jug in 67, he passed away in 70, but at that time he was transitioning more of being just the trainer, and
Yeah.
he was, yes.
So in 1967, I'm just trying to place where were you?
Okay, we lived in Cincinnati,
Right.
and at that, of course, but with 5 kids, my mother they would hire someone to come and stay with us in Cincinnati, the 5 of us, so she and Dad could come every year. Delaware was their, you know, they would go to Delaware for the week, and then sometimes down to Lexington the week after that to race. And that was the one week my mother didn't want all of us kids with. That was,
So you
they
weren't able to see
we
him
did
on
not
his big
see that
day.
race. We got the call from my mother that, you know,
Yeah.
that my father had won that race, but no, we didn't see it. But of course, my
Yeah.
mother was there.
Do you get the sense that it changed his life? in 1967, that was, I guess that was a high point, I'm assuming.
It was a high point. He did very well, but yeah, that was a very high point.
Yeah.
And being another Ohio driver, I think, that was the crowds loved that. They wanted best of all to win
Yeah.
that race, I think. So he had a lot of support.
Great. Okay.
Mhm.
This is a question for both of you. I wonder how you see the jug being something special, and what is it that you think makes the jug special?
Oh boy, I think it's that small town feel about it. To think of this small town at Delaware being able to to have a race that big and that important. Part of that Triple Crown of pacing, and I don't think there's any other small town that has anything even like that. So I think it's really unique, and
just I mean, kind of the whole, especially before the whole Delaware community becoming, a part of that, whether it be, I mean, all the local people had something to do with it, whether it be,
true.
the Rotary clubs, doing the stuff up in the grandstand, the Kiwanis Club selling the tickets at the doors or at the gates. It's still a big community event, and it takes the whole community to put it together, and all that. So yeah, and you don't, if you've never been to a big track for a big race, and like out at
Scioto Downs, you never
Yeah.
get back in the barn area unless you have a pass or really to mingle with. I think for a long time they could mingle with the
everything's-
drivers and
right, it's separate, but it just has a different feel if it's at a commercial event. It's well, for one, to get to the track, well, not as much as but it used to be. You almost had to come through the fairgrounds part of it to get to the track, because and it's not like going to the front gate, walk up, get in your seat, and then you're watching the races. You're coming through a small town event, which is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
in the early days, my mom said, all the drivers would come to town and they would stay the whole week, and there was only one hotel at the time. So most of them would stay with local people for that week, and that was kind of impressive too. Now they fly in and fly out same day probably. A lot of the, if they're only racing for that day.
Or they stay at Polaris.
Yeah, right. So,
yeah.
we've
Non-Delaware
kind of,
hotel.
like you said, the halfway house was the only thing going on 23 there for a long time. I mean, we were separated a little bit, but she said, and I remember even like Wilson's, the clothing store, they'd call Mom weeks before and say, oh, we've got some, new clothes in to see, to wear for the jug or wear for Fair Week. And I'm sure they did that, maybe with a lot of other people in town, just getting ready for that day, how special, people would dress up. And even if it was warm, that they'd have their new fall clothes on and, and just to really to dress up and see all their neighbors. And it was a prestigious thing too.
That may be one of the other things that's changed, is how people dress.
Right. Well,
Right.
I was just thinking that even as late as when after we were married and going to the races, if we were lucky enough to be the ones that were chosen to go up with her mom and everybody into the box.
You had to dress for it.
You had to dress, a jacket,
Right.
Maybe not a tie, but a jacket, and you had to be, you look, now it's not quite
that's
like
changed
that,
a lot. I guess, yeah.
I mean, I still
In so many
struggle with
places.
going up there wearing shorts or
Yeah.
something like that. But, back stretch a little bit different, has always been, but yeah.
In order for the jug to continue into the future, are there any changes that you think need or could be made to maintain this over time?
Oh gosh. we talked about it, but we didn't come up with much on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not having as much of a connection to it as we did, you know, when she still had family
Right,
actually in the
not
business. It's
quite
kind of
sure.
hard to tell, but you hear, you know, that the harness racing is not like it used to be. It's not, you know, not every county fair has races anymore, you know. You know, that used to be, you could go to, any week in the summer, you could find a race somewhere to go to, and a lot of people did. So, I mean, the whole industry's changing. I mean, the whole off-track betting and all that, they say may be the savior of it, but sometimes you feel almost, well, but is it taken away from it? Because I can go here and bet when the race is in, you know, and I don't really have to see, I can see the race on TV, I don't, you know. So, it's kind of, I don't know what the answer is, but I think maybe continuing that, you know, that small town feel and is, at least to the people that we know, I think that's the draw now, is that, you know, to the vast majority that they need to keep it alive. I don't know, you know.
The way always
Yeah.
that
I mean,
getting together for
yeah,
that
and
fair each.
she
you know,
talked
see the
about
races.
having the box. This is a little off subject, but so she still has the box that her granddad got for the very first year, which is right on the finish line. So and I didn't know this until the day she started doing research. So the first 3 boxes on the finish line. So there's Curly's was in the middle, then the Thompsons had one, and the Nevilles had one. Well, now we have the one in the middle, and the Thompsons have both on either side. But other than that, I don't know that there's people that have had that, and you know, for those length of period, I don't know. And it used to be, man, that was golden. You know, we'd make, but now I think there's empty boxes up there. I don't know, but it's just kind of, you know,
Yeah,
to us,
the
I
box
don't know
was
that we'll ever give it up.
$50 for the week, and my grandmother thought that was outrageous. She didn't know why they needed to have it. But, so it's been passed down the family, and we've sure enjoyed it
Yeah.
quite a bit. And now our children like to go. The next generation, they love to go to the races, and
That's nice.
yeah.
That's nice. Mitch, I wanted to ask you about your relatives. So you have 2 longtime outriders,
Yep.
and so Marilyn Evans goes back to, I don't know when.
I'm not sure either.
Okay.
And I tried to. I'm actually kind of working on her to maybe see if she'd be interested in talking to you, but so far it's, yeah. I mean, she just lost her husband, you know, a little over a month ago. They met with the horses and all that, so it's.
I'm sorry.
But I think she, you know, I think maybe she will. I don't know. So, but yeah.
Okay. So were there stories that you heard because of Marilyn Evans and Diane Winter's work?
Well, like I said, I remember being up there and hearing, you know, because it was Marilyn's father who was the stall superintendent for here and for the state fairgrounds for the racing. He did the stalls down there too. So, you know, you just kind of go and hang out, and you'd hear, you know, I mean, I remember helping Marilyn with the horses once I got a little bit older and things like that, and just her talking to the drivers, and you know, she at the time the back then it wasn't the outrider. Now they could put a little bit more emphasis, I think, on also helping with the track. Not, I mean, if a horse is loose or whatever. Marilyn's was more of a, she carried a big flag with her every time she went out. You know, she was in a big silver saddle and all that. But she would talk to the drivers, and some of them would say, hey, can I put my horse right up? You know, I remember her telling about that. The horse is better if he's closer to a horse. Can I get him close to, and her horse, I mean, she had the same horse for years and years that it was all white, you know, horse. He was pretty good, you know, but just those, you know.
It's kind of pageantry. I mean,
Yeah,
she
yeah,
really
it
put
was,
on a
you
show
know.
when they would parade the horses
Yeah.
in front of the
Yeah.
grandstand. It was
You
quite
know,
a
but,
show.
But again, for me, it was like, okay, now I can get in the paddock where I'm closer to all the action, you know, and stuff. So, but yeah, And even this way off as far as the race itself, but even my granddad was the fire chief of the volunteer fire department that covers the track portion still does the track portion of the fairgrounds. And at some point I'm assuming in the 60s, the crowds had gotten big enough that they determined they needed to bring a truck up during the races. So he's the brother of the stall superintendent. So this is more family coming together, that we always had basically a safe place to be to watch, and we could, get up on the truck and watch the races and all that stuff. So I just, just good memories of, and back then, I don't know why this just popped into my head. I remember a couple, and I don't know if it might have been your granddad's. No, it wasn't your granddad's stable because it wasn't in the right barn. But there would be horses that they'd have goats as companion animals, and they'd be at the fairgrounds, in the stalls with them and stuff. And I haven't seen that for years. I don't know why that just popped into my head.
But it tells you it was a fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
But they'd actually have goats in to keep the horses calm or whatever, a goat, they were buddies or whatever. But people come back and it's just the memories of that. And the drivers were, I don't want to say they were quite like NFL football players or baseball players or basketball players are today, but they were to the horse fans. There was a set of them, I don't know how many, 10, 12, I suppose, people that were,
Like NASCAR or something.
Yeah, something like that. You had
Drivers.
one and you wanted to follow. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
But yeah, the
Certain drivers they
and
follow.
I seem to remember
Always bet
that
on.
even when Marilyn was the outrider, initially at least, she didn't even leave. I don't think because she lived here in town right on 36. I think she just would bring her horse in the morning and would do the outriding and then take him back home to her stalls at night. I don't remember if they ever, I'm guessing at some point they probably stalled here too. But I don't remember that. Those are details.
Okay.
But yeah.
Suppose that Delaware no longer had the jug. What impact, if any, would that have on you personally? What do you think it would mean for the county?
It would be very sad personally to see that race that leave Delaware. I just keep hoping that they can hang on and that it's it remains here. So it'd be sad personally to see that go. I think it's good for the city of Delaware that that so many people get together every year at the jug, and it would be sad to see something like that go from this town, because I think it does still mean a lot to many people in Delaware.
Well, probably in the 70s and stuff, there was always rumors, and actually I think there was some actions trying to be taken where the jug would go to
Wondering
Cider
if Delaware
Downs.
could handle a race
that it
that
was
big.
getting big enough that it needed to go to a private track, or not being that involved with it at the time, I just remember those rumors being out there, and so I don't know how close that ever was, but it seemed like it, and I always felt like the city, not government per se, they probably did too, but the city people, and county people would pull together. And I don't know if there's enough of that left in Delaware that if that were to ever happen, it would, I think there would be, but as you said, the people that were super involved in the races back when it was the highlights were, they're dwindling away. So.
Are there any other topics that you would like to comment on, stories that you think we really need to hear in order to get a full picture of the jug?
I don't know whether I told. Let me can't remember if I had any other. I don't think there was anything.
didn't
think
tell
I've
the one
told-
about your granddad talking to Hervé Filion when he beat.
I had to, well, this is a picture, but I can't. It was my grandfather coming out and grabbing my dad around the neck at the race. That's Jimmy Crum is over here. Do you remember him?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, the sports. Yeah, he's after he won that race, and then there's my grandfather choking him on the on the track right as the
That's a wonderful picture.
It's a really neat picture. Oh, and one thing I was reading that race with Nancy Munden and Albatross, and they said that Hervé Filion went to my grandfather and said, "Give me, what do you think we should do? What should I do with this horse? How should I drive him? And he pretty much said, get to the front, go as fast as you can, and just go right to the front." And after that, he came back and he said, "You told me what to do, and it worked." And Grandpa said, "Yeah, but if it hadn't worked, he'd be as mad as hell at me." I don't know whether I told that very well, but yeah, there's a lot of strategies in the race,
Sure.
and
Sure. And of course, if you
And of course,
are giving advice and it doesn't work out.
it doesn't
then-
work. Yeah, it's like that. Yeah,
And not so
it
happy.
could have changed, but
I remember
But-
sitting when Tim, her brother, I wasn't helping him that year. I was up in the box and he was racing, and he drove his own horse. And I'm pretty sure it was Jug Day. It wasn't a jug race, but it was Jug Day. And trying to think exactly I don't remember exactly what happened, but her mom was there and she was mad.
my mom really knew how a race should be
And
should go, and when it was time to take the horse out and go with them, and she was real smart about it. And my brother didn't race the race as well as she thought he should have, and she said, "These Hackett men always want to embarrass me in Delaware."
And I remember she wanted to go to the barn.
Because that was her.
And we were walking
Yeah.
with her, and the closer we got to the barn, the faster she was walking. I mean, I had a hold of her arm as we were going back
She
there.
loved racing,
And I was-
everything about it.
I was starting to fear for Tim's life.
Yeah.
At that point.
Would embarrass me in Delaware.
And as I recall, when she got to the barn, Tim was in the barn, and he was cooling the horse and everything, and he just looked at her. She didn't. I don't think she even said anything at first, and he said, "Don't start with me. I know." So he
You know what I do.
Yeah. But
Well, okay. Let me ask one last question. You had mentioned perhaps us being able to interview Marilyn Evans. Are there other people who you think we really ought to talk to because their stories are really important to collect?
I'm trying to think of someone that.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think you ought to talk to some of the Thompsons, and which you probably already have them on your list if they'll talk. But yeah, I mean, the sad part is like her mom and all those are gone.
Mm-hmm. You wonder even if the next generation of people that are going out to the races, what's bringing them out. I can't really say anyone in particular, but I wonder, the people that are watching the race now, what is the draw? And
That's a great question.
from
Yeah.
in Delaware or
Sure, what brings you here?
Mhm.
And
I mean,
yeah.
I'm struggling to come up with somebody personally that I know that, I know you've already interviewed Diane, I think, Winters. And because I think she ended up outriding as long or longer than Marilyn did, as I recall. Yeah. And I don't know if Marilyn used to come up when Diane was out riding, and she would come up and stand and watch in the paddock with Diane some a lot. You know, I remember those. But
So, but some other,
yeah, I mean, I mean, there's got to be local people that you know we're just not thinking of that have got those histories and stuff like that. You know,
If
so-
I'm catching you flat-footed, and I think I am, just know that if somebody comes to mind,
yeah.
you know, it would be very, very helpful
Yeah.
for you to make some suggestions.
okay, because I have a cousin in London, Ohio, that her son has been doing some driving, and I just wonder if, you know, if I could, I'll get in touch with her and see if, you know, maybe someone that's actually racing right now, because I know he
Yeah.
was at the last jug. You know, if there'd be any way to
Okay.
get an interview with.
His name is?
Well, I'm not, it's Browning,
Okay.
but it's Mary Jo is my cousin. Let me contact her, and and see if, I think that would be kind of
No.
interesting.
I'm trying to think. Was Mary Jo's dad the driver?
Dick Hackett, yeah.
So
Yeah.
her dad's brother also was a trainer and driver.
Yeah, so,
Um, I assume too,
But
I
I
mean,
know-
I'm maybe too obvious. Billy Walters is still around. He'd be I mean,
that's a good idea.
because his dad has been in the racehorse business, and Billy'd raced for years. You know, I don't know if any of the, I mean, what McNamara's would still be, you know, still involved or
that's-
enough that they'd be,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah.
One thing that I have dreamt of is doing something kind of like a family tree, because you folks are wonderful examples of how intertwined, you know, so Tom Wright is connected
Oh,
to
yeah.
the Thompsons, and, you know, you're just mentioning
Yes.
Yeah.
all of these people who are related to and know,
Yeah.
and so when people talk about the jug feeling like a family,
Mm-hmm.
it really is for some families.
Right. Well, and this is kind of separate from the jug, but I mean, obviously, we met in high school, but I mean, we didn't date or anything at that point, but my first kind of real job, I worked for a local company that made and repaired racehorse sulkies.
Oh,
And did that in high school and then out of high school, and that's where I would have met, actually I met
Yeah,
her
Carly.
grandfather, because he would come in there. And one of the other things I remember of Fair Week for us was kind of a busy week that we would go back and forth to the track picking up stuff and doing things. But one of the guys that worked in the shop with me, his dad, or what, no, the father and son worked in the shop with me. The father grew up with Delvin Miller in Washington, Pennsylvania. So Delvin, who to us was like, probably not quite like LeBron James, but you know, somebody like that would always stop in the sulky shop the week of the fair, and we'd see him. And it was, to me, being in high school, it was like, whoa.
Yeah. Hey, that's,
And
yeah.
then we would always, he had a museum over in Pennsylvania of horse-drawn stuff and everything, and we would go over and pick up stuff and take it over there, and I'd get to go to his farm, see where Adios was and stuff. But yeah, I mean, how the whole thing intertwines.
I know,
You know?
and how they even got the Little Brown Jug here. I can't tell you the whole story, but with Joe Neville, I mean, I don't know whether you've read how. I think they had decided, if I'm right, they had decided that Delaware they just couldn't host a race that large. And they were supposed to turn it down.
well,
And supposedly what Joe Neville said, I forgot to send that.
Yeah.
I
right,
forgot to send it. Yeah, so I
the
love
the
that
default
story.
thing was that you're going to have the race.
Yeah.
Apparently, he talked to Hank Thompson, who said, "I don't know if we're ready. I don't think we should do this."
That's-
And so he, quotes, forgot to send
Plum
the no
forgot.
thank you. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Well,
But
love
another strange connection is that, so you know Phil Terry, and
Yes.
he's married to Katie. and
Yes.
Katie
She's a
is,
McNamara. Yeah, you were just talking about it. goes on and on.
And,
Yeah.
and there you have it.
Yeah. And
Right.
Katie McNamara's great-grandparents or grandparents lived right next door to my parents.
geez.
Oh, wow.
When
Yeah,
I was
that's
growing
right.
up. So,
Okay.
so yeah,
Small
I mean, it's a
But-
real small town. Yep. Yep.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank
I really
you.
appreciate it.